Gavin Reynolds stood on the balcony of his penthouse, raising a glass of vintage scotch to the city skyline. He had done it. He hadn't just divorced his wife. He had annihilated her. He kept the house, the cars, and the offshore accounts she never knew existed. To him, Sarah was just dead weight he had finally shed to make room for a younger, hungrier model. He thought he was the apex predator of Chicago. But Gavin forgot one crucial rule of warfare: never humiliate an enemy until you know who backs them. He thought Sarah was a nobody. He was about to learn that her silence wasn't weakness, it was a countdown. The degradation didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, calculated erosion. Gavin Reynolds, a man who had clawed his way up from a mid-level sales associate to the senior vice president of Vanguard Logistics, viewed people as assets or liabilities. After 7 years of marriage, his wife, Sarah, had firmly moved into the liability column. Sarah was quiet. She was kind. She worked part-time as a librarian at the local elementary school and spent her weekends tending to their garden or volunteering at the animal shelter. To Gavin, she was painfully, excruciatingly average. As his star rose in the Chicago corporate world, he began to resent her modesty. He wanted a wife who looked like a trophy and networked like a shark. Sarah just wanted to read books and cook dinner. The end began on a Tuesday night at Le Monde, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Gavin had told Sarah to dress up, and she had worn her favorite blue dress, a simple, off-the-rack piece she'd had for years. When they walked in, Gavin grimaced, noticing how the hostess glanced at Sarah's sensible heels. He didn't pull out her chair. "We need to talk," Gavin said, not even waiting for the wine to be poured. Sarah smiled nervously, reaching for his hand across the white tablecloth. "Is everything okay at work, Gavin? You've been so stressed lately." He pulled his hand away as if she were contagious. "It's not work. It's us. Well, mostly you." Sarah froze. The noise of the restaurant seemed to drop away. "I don't understand." "Look, Sarah, let's be real," Gavin said, his voice loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. "I've outgrown this. I've outgrown you. When we met, I was just starting out. I needed someone, intact domestic, someone to wash the clothes and keep the lights on. But now, I'm closing 8-figure deals. I'm meeting with senators. And frankly, bringing you to galas is embarrassing." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Embarrassing? Gavin, I've supported you for 7 years. When you were fired from the firm in 2018, who paid the rent? Who stayed up with you when you were depressed? Ancient history," Gavin waved a hand dismissively. "That's the problem with you. You live in the past, I live in the future, and my future doesn't include a librarian who buys her clothes at Target." He took a sip of water, looking bored. "I've met someone else. Her name is Jessica. She's in marketing. She gets it. She gets me." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she didn't scream. She didn't throw her wine. She just stared at him, a strange, unreadable expression crossing her face. "You're leaving me for a marketing associate?" "I'm leaving you for an upgrade," Gavin corrected cruelly. "I've already spoken to my lawyers. You'll be served tomorrow. Don't try to fight it, Sarah. You know I have the resources to drag this out until you're bankrupt. Just take the settlement and disappear. Go back to your dad's little farm, or whatever he does." Sarah looked down at her lap. Her father, Arthur, was a subject Gavin rarely asked about. Gavin knew Arthur was retired and lived on a large property in Wyoming. In Gavin's mind, Arthur was a retired ranch hand, or maybe a mechanic who lived in a trailer. Gavin had never bothered to visit. He was too busy building an empire. "You want a divorce?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I demand one." "Okay," Sarah said. She stood up, picking up her purse. "If that's what you want, Gavin, I won't fight you." Gavin laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Of course you won't. You can't afford to." He watched her walk out of the restaurant, feeling a surge of triumph. It was easier than he thought. He pulled out his phone and texted Jessica, "Done." She folded like a cheap suit. "Drinks at my place?" He had no idea that the cheap suit he just discarded was the only thing protecting him from a hurricane. The divorce proceedings were less of a negotiation and more of a slaughter. Or at least, that's how Gavin described it to his friends at the squash club. He hired Simon Blackwood, a divorce attorney known in Chicago as the Butcher. Blackwood was expensive, aggressive, and morally bankrupt, exactly Gavin's type. Here's the strategy, Blackwood told Gavin, in his glass-walled office overlooking the river. We lowball her on the alimony. We claim the penthouse was purchased with premarital assets. I know it wasn't, but we can bury her in paperwork if she contests it. And the offshore accounts? She doesn't know about the shell company in the Caymans, right? She thinks shell company is something you find at the beach, Gavin sneered. She's financially illiterate. She let me handle everything. Perfect, Blackwood grinned. We offer her a lump sum, $50,000, and she signs an NDA so she can't talk about your business dealings. If she refuses, we threaten to sue her for emotional distress and drag her name through the mud. When the papers were sent to Sarah, she was staying at a small motel on the outskirts of the city. She didn't hire a high-powered attorney. She hired a local family lawyer, a frantic woman named Brenda who worked out of a strip mall. When the two sides met for mediation, the contrast was comical. Gavin and Blackwood sat on one side of the mahogany conference table in tailored Italian suits, flanked by stacks of binders. Sarah sat on the other side in a cardigan, with Brenda shuffling through a messy briefcase. My client is being generous, Blackwood started, sliding a thin document across the table. 50,000. No alimony. She vacates the property immediately. Brenda looked at the paper, adjusting her glasses. Mr. Reynolds, the marital assets are valued at over $4 million. This is an offer to keep us from destroying her, Gavin interrupted, leaning forward. He locked eyes with Sarah. Sarah, look at me. You know you can't win this. You don't have the money for a forensic accountant. You don't have the stamina. Do you really want to spend the next 3 years in court? Or do you want to take the cash and go buy, I don't know, a lot of cat food? Sarah looked tired. She hadn't been sleeping. She looked at Gavin, then at the aggressive lawyer, and finally at the document. Is this really what you want, Gavin? She asked softly. To leave me with nothing? I earned it, Gavin snapped. You just existed near it. Sarah took a deep breath. She picked up the pen. Sarah, don't sign that, Brenda whispered urgently. We can fight for more. It's okay, Brenda, Sarah said, her voice steady. I just want it to be over. I want him to be free. She signed her name, Sarah Reynolds. Gavin snatched the paper away before the ink was dry. Smart girl. Now, please change your last name back to Sterling. I don't want you dragging my brand down. I will, Sarah said. She stood up. Goodbye, Gavin. I hope everything you've built is worth what you paid for it. It's worth every penny, he smirked. As Sarah left the office, Gavin high-fived his lawyer. That was pathetic. I almost feel bad for her. Almost. 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Gavin wasted no time. He moved Jessica into the penthouse the very next day. They threw a massive freedom party to celebrate. The penthouse was packed with Chicago's elite bankers, tech entrepreneurs, and models. Champagne flowed like water. Jessica was wearing a diamond necklace that Gavin had bought with money he'd hidden from the settlement. Gavin stood on a table, holding a microphone, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. Listen up, everyone, he shouted over the thumping bass of the music. They say marriage is grand, but divorce? Divorce is 100 grand. The crowd roared with laughter. To Sarah, Gavin toasted mockingly. The best mistake I ever made. Thanks for the freedom, honey, and thanks for being too stupid to check the Cayman accounts. The room erupted in cheers. Jessica kissed him passionately, the crowd applauding the new power couple. Gavin felt like a god. He had won. He had beaten the system. He had discarded the dead weight and kept all the gold. But in the back of the room, near the caterers, a man in a simple black suit was watching. He wasn't a guest. He was a private investigator named Cole. He adjusted his earpiece and whispered into his lapel. He just admitted to the Cayman fraud in front of 100 witnesses. I have it recorded. On the other end of the line, sitting in a leather armchair in a dark library in Wyoming, Arthur Sterling took a sip of tea. Good, Arthur said, his voice like grinding gravel. Let him have his fun tonight, Cole. Let him feel untouchable. Tomorrow, we start turning off the lights. Arthur hung up the phone and looked at a photo on his desk. It was of him and Sarah. He wasn't just a retired rancher. Arthur Sterling was the majority shareholder of Sterling Holloway Global, the private equity firm that had just quietly acquired the controlling stake of the bank that held all of Gavin's loans. Gavin bragged about winning the battle. He didn't know the war had just been authorized. For 3 months following the divorce, Gavin Reynolds lived in a state of euphoric delusion. He was the king of Chicago, or at least, that was the reflection staring back at him from the mirrored walls of his expanded corner office. With Sarah gone, he felt unanchored in the best possible way, to no one to question his late nights, no one to ask about the morality of his business decisions, and no one to remind him of his humble beginnings. His company, Vanguard Logistics, was seemingly thriving. He had just secured a tentative agreement for a massive contract with Nebula Tech, a Silicon Valley giant looking to move their distribution hubs to the Midwest. This deal would push Vanguard's valuation into the stratosphere. Gavin had already spent the commission in his head, a summer home in the Hamptons and a new Porsche for Jessica. Jessica, however, was proving to be a more expensive accessory than he had anticipated. Gavin, this apartment is nice, Jessica said one evening, looking around the penthouse that Sarah had once decorated with warm, earthy tones, now redecorated in cold chrome and black leather, but it's a bit dated. My friend Courtney just moved into the Spire. They have a private elevator for cars. We should look into that. Gavin swirled his whiskey, fighting a flicker of annoyance. This penthouse is worth $4 million, Jess. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Once the Nebula deal signs next month, we can buy the whole damn building if we want. You promised we'd go to Street Bart's next week, she pouted, checking her reflection in her phone. I already posted about it. And we will, Gavin assured her, forcing a smile. I just need to move some funds around. Liquidating the marital assets took a bit longer than expected. That was a lie. The assets were liquid. The problem was that Gavin was bleeding cash. Between the settlement legal fees, Blackwood didn't come cheap, the redecorating, Jessica's shopping sprees at the Magnificent Mile, and the bribes consulting fees, he called them to secure the Nebula contract. His cash flow was tight, but Gavin wasn't worried. He was a master of the shell game. As long as the music kept playing, he could keep moving the debt from one credit line to another. Hundreds of miles away, the atmosphere was drastically different. Sarah sat on the porch of a sprawling ranch house in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The air smelled of pine needles and coming snow. This wasn't just a farm, it was the Double S Ranch, a 20,000-acre estate that had been in the Sterling family for 4 generations. Her father, Arthur Sterling, sat beside her in a rocking chair. He was wearing worn denim and flannel, looking every bit the retired rancher Gavin assumed he was. But on the table between them lay a tablet displaying global market trends and a dossier stamped with the logo of Sterling Mercer Capital. You look different, Sarah, Arthur said gently. You look like you can breathe again. Sarah took a sip of lemonade. I feel stupid, Dad. For 7 years, I played small. I clipped coupons. I drove that beat-up Honda. I wanted him to love me for me, not for the Sterling money. I wanted to prove that we could build a life together from scratch. And you did build a life, Arthur said, his voice hardening. You built his life. You used your trust fund dividends to pay off his student loans anonymously. You paid the down payment on the penthouse through that Shell LLC so his ego wouldn't be bruised. You made him, Sarah, and he threw me away like garbage, she whispered. He didn't just throw you away, Arthur corrected. He tried to break you, he mocked you, and then he committed a federal crime by hiding assets during a divorce proceeding. Arthur tapped the tablet. Cole sent the audio files. Gavin admitted to the Cayman accounts. We have him on fraud, Sarah. We could send him to prison tomorrow. Sarah looked out at the mountains. Prison is too easy. If he goes to jail, he'll play the victim. He'll write a book about how the system failed him. I don't want him to be a martyr. I want him to understand. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Understand what? That he didn't win, Sarah said, her eyes finally showing a spark of the steel that ran in the Sterling bloodline. I want him to realize that everything he has, his status, his company, his ego, was a gift I allowed him to keep. Until now. Arthur smiled, a terrifyingly cold expression for such a warm-looking man. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Get me the acquisition team, Arthur said. Initiate Operation Glasshouse. And tell the team at the First National Bank of Chicago to call the loan. Back in Chicago, Gavin was in his office, yelling at his assistant, a young man named Peter. What do you mean the corporate card was declined? Gavin barked. I'm trying to book a flight to Street Bart's. I don't know, sir, Peter stammered, trembling. The bank said there's a freeze on the account pending a compliance review. Compliance review? Gavin laughed incredulously. I've been banking with them for 10 years. Get me the branch manager. Get me Henderson. Mr. Henderson isn't taking calls, sir. He said you need to come in personally tomorrow morning. Gavin slammed the phone down. Incompetent bureaucrats. He didn't know it yet, but the false summit was over. The descent had begun. The meeting at the First National Bank of Chicago was scheduled for 9 a.m. Gavin strolled in at 9:15, wearing a $3,000 suit and carrying a latte. He intended to project dominance. He intended to yell, threaten to move his accounts to Chase, and demand an apology. He was escorted not to the usual glass office of the branch manager, but to a windowless conference room in the basement levels. Sitting there was Mr. Henderson, a man Gavin had played golf with, and two other individuals he didn't recognize. They wore charcoal suits and had the dead-eyed look of corporate executioners. Bob! Gavin boomed, extending a hand. What is this nonsense? My girl couldn't buy a handbag yesterday. You're making me look bad. Henderson didn't stand up. He didn't shake the hand. He pointed to a chair. Sit down, Mr. Reynolds. Gavin's smile faltered. He sat. Okay. What's the joke? This is Mr. Thorne and Miss Prawl, Henderson said, his voice devoid of friendship. They represent the new ownership group that acquired First National last week. New ownership? Gavin scoffed. Who cares? What does that have to do with my credit line? Everything, Miss Prawl said. She opened a binder. Mr. Reynolds, Vanguard Logistics, operates on a revolving line of credit of $12 million. This line is secured by your accounts receivable and your personal guarantee. Standard practice, Gavin said, leaning back. Your line of credit has covenants, she continued, one of which is the morality and repute clause. It states that if the borrower engages in conduct that could damage the bank's reputation or indicates financial instability, the bank reserves the right to accelerate the debt. I haven't done anything, Gavin snapped. I'm a pillar of the community. We received an anonymous tip, accompanied by audio evidence, suggesting you have engaged in bankruptcy fraud and perjury regarding offshore assets, Prawl said calmly. Furthermore, upon review of your financials, we found that your accounts receivable from the Nebula deal have been pre-booked before the contract was signed. That is, accounting fraud, Mr. Reynolds. The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed, but Gavin felt sweat trickling down his back. That's a misunderstanding, Gavin stammered. The Nebula deal is a lock. I was proactive. It's fraud, Thorne spoke for the first time. We are calling the loan. You have 48 hours to repay the $12 million in full. If you fail to do so, we will seize the collateral. That includes the company, the penthouse, and your personal assets. 48 hours? That's impossible, Gavin shouted, standing up. You can't do this. I'll sue you. Read the contract, Gavin, Henderson said quietly, finally looking him in the eye. It's ironclad, and frankly, you're toxic. We're cutting you loose. Gavin stormed out of the bank, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He needed money. Fast. He called Simon Blackwood, his divorce lawyer. Simon, I'm in a jam, Gavin said, pacing on the sidewalk, ignoring the pedestrians bumping into him. The bank is calling the loan. I need to access the Cayman money. Now. Gavin, shut up, Blackwood hissed into the phone. Don't say that over an open line. I don't care. I need the 2 million. You can't touch it, Blackwood said, his voice shaking. I just got a call from the Bar Association. Someone filed a grievance against me. They have logs of our conversations, Gavin. They know I advised you to hide assets. I'm looking at disbarment. I can't help you. Don't call me again. The line went dead. Gavin stood on the street corner, feeling the world tilt. He dialed Jessica. Babe, listen, he started, trying to keep his voice steady. We need to return the bracelet. Just for a few days. Cash flow issue. Are you joking? Jessica's voice was shrill. I'm at lunch with the girls. You're embarrassing me. Jessica, do it, he screamed. You know what? Jessica replied, her tone turning icy. I knew this would happen. You talk big, Gavin, but I saw the letters from the IRS on the counter. Don't bother coming home. I'm taking the bracelet, and I'm going to stay with Courtney. Jessica. She hung up. Gavin was alone, but he still had one card to play, the Nebula deal. If he could get Nebula to sign today and give him an advance, he could pay off the bank. He could save everything. He hailed a taxi. His Uber account was suspended and raced to his office. He needed to prepare the pitch of his life. When he arrived at Vanguard, the office was strangely quiet. His employees were huddled in groups, whispering. When they saw him, they scattered. Peter, Gavin shouted, get me the Nebula file, and get me the CEO of Nebula on the phone. Peter walked out of his office, holding a box of his personal belongings. I can't do that, Gavin, Peter said. Why the hell not? Because Nebula called an hour ago. They're pulling out. Gavin felt his knees give way. He grabbed the edge of a desk to steady himself. Why? Why would they pull out? They were acquired, Peter said, looking at Gavin with a mixture of pity and contempt. A private equity firm bought Nebula this morning in a hostile takeover. The new owners canceled all pending vendor contracts immediately to restructure. Who? Gavin whispered. Who bought them? Some group called Sterling Mercer, Peter said. Never heard of them. Anyway, I quit. My paycheck bounced this morning. Sterling Mercer. The name sounded vaguely familiar, sophisticated, and old money. Gavin didn't connect the dots. He couldn't. His brain was in survival mode. He sat in his leather chair in the empty office as the sun began to set. He was ruined. The bank would take the business tomorrow. The condo was leveraged. He had no wife, no girlfriend, no lawyer. Then, his office phone rang. A single, crisp ring. He stared at it. It rang again. He picked it up. Hello? He croaked. Mr. Reynolds, a smooth, British voice spoke. My name is Cole. I represent the chairman of Sterling Mercer Capital. Gavin's eyes widened. The people who bought Nebula? The very same. The chairman understands you are in a difficult position regarding your liquidity. He is an admirer of your tenacity. He would like to offer you a lifeline. I'll take it, Gavin said immediately, desperation clawing at his throat. Whatever it is, I'll take it. I can sell Vanguard to you. I just need a payout. I need to cover my debts. The chairman is willing to discuss a buyout, Cole said, but he prefers to do business face to face. There is a gala tonight at the Grand Hotel. The chairman will be there. He requests your presence. 8 p.m. Do not be late. I'll be there, Gavin said, tears of relief pricking his eyes. Thank you. Tell him thank you. Oh, he knows, Cole said enigmatically. He knows everything. Gavin Reynolds spent the last of his cash on a fresh shave and a shoe shine. He put on his tuxedo, the one he had worn to the Freedom Party. He looked in the mirror. He looked tired, yes, but he could still sell. He just needed to sell himself one last time. If he could get Sterling Mercer to buy Vanguard for even a fraction of its value, he could clear the bank debt and start over. Maybe in Florida. He arrived at the Grand Hotel at 7:55 p.m. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. The room was filled with the true elite of the country senators, oil tycoons, tech billionaires. Gavin realized with a jolt that he was out of his depth. These weren't the Chicago social climbers he was used to. This was old money, the kind of money that whispered. He scanned the room, looking for anyone who looked like a chairman. Mr. Reynolds? Gavin turned. The man from the phone, Cole, stood there. He was tall, dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than Gavin's car. Right this way. The chairman is expecting you in the private VIP lounge. Gavin followed Cole through the crowd, his heart pounding. They reached a set of heavy oak doors, guarded by security. Cole nodded, and the doors opened. The room inside was quieter, smelling of cigars and aged brandy. A fire crackled in the hearth. A group of men stood by the window, but one man sat in a high-backed leather armchair, facing the fire, his back to Gavin. Sir, Cole said, Mr. Reynolds is here. Excellent, the man said. The voice was deep, gravelly. Pour him a drink, Cole. The 52 Macallan. Gavin took the glass, his hands trembling slightly. Mr. Chairman, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this opportunity. Vanguard is a solid asset. We just hit a temporary snag with the liquidity markets and— Sit down, Gavin, the man said. Gavin froze. The man hadn't turned around, but the tone was commanding. Gavin sat on the edge of the sofa. The chair slowly swiveled around. Gavin prepared his best winning smile. It died on his lips instantly. Sitting in the chair was not a Wall Street shark. It was an older man with weathered skin, calloused hands, resting on the armrests, and eyes that looked like blue ice. He was wearing a tuxedo, but he looked like he would be more comfortable strangling a wolf. Arthur? Gavin gasped. It was his ex-father-in-law, Sarah's dad. The man Gavin had assumed was a broke farmer. Hello, Gavin, Arthur Sterling said, calmly. I don't understand, Gavin stammered, looking around the room. Where is the chairman? I was told to meet the chairman of Sterling Mercer. You're looking at him, Arthur said. Sterling, Mercer. My mother's maiden name was Mercer. I founded the firm in 1982. We specialize in distress acquisitions. We buy broken things and fix them, or we scrap them. Gavin's brain was misfiring. You? But you live on a farm. Sarah drove a Honda. You're a nobody. Arthur chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Wealth shouts, Gavin. Power whispers. I didn't feel the need to impress a mid-level logistics manager with a leased BMW. Does Sarah know? Gavin whispered. Does she know you're here? Turn around, Arthur said. Gavin turned. Standing in the shadows near the bookshelf was a woman. She stepped into the light. It was Sarah, but it wasn't the Sarah he knew. The Sarah he knew wore cardigans and flats. This woman was wearing a floor-length gown of emerald silk that hugged a figure he had never appreciated. She wore diamonds around her neck that were real heavy, flawless stones. Her hair was styled in intricate waves, but the biggest difference was her eyes. The meekness was gone. Hello, Gavin, she said. Her voice was cool, detached. Sarah, Gavin breathed. He stood up, instinctively reaching out. Sarah, you look incredible. Look, this is all a misunderstanding. I missed you. I made a mistake. Sarah didn't flinch. You didn't make a mistake, Gavin. You made a choice. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to steal from our marriage. You chose Jessica. Jessica meant nothing, Gavin pleaded, glancing between Arthur and Sarah. I was confused. The stress of the job. Look, Arthur, Mr. Sterling, if you own the bank, you can stop this. You can call off the loan. We're family. We were family, Arthur corrected, standing up. He was taller than Gavin, broader. Now, you are a liability on my balance sheet. I can fix it, Gavin cried. I'll work for you. I'll run Vanguard under your umbrella. Just don't ruin me. Run it? Arthur laughed. Gavin, you don't seem to understand. I didn't buy Nebula and the bank to hire you. I bought them to audit you. Arthur picked up a file from the side table and tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. That is a forensic accounting of your entire life, Arthur said. The shell companies in the Caymans, the tax evasion, the bribes paid to the previous Nebula procurement officer. It's all there. Gavin looked at the file, pale as a sheet. What do you want? I want you to sign Vanguard over to Sarah, Arthur said. Sen said, 100% of the equity. For $1. And if I don't, then I hand that file to the FBI, the IRS, and the SEC. Arthur said simply. You'll go to prison for 20 years. And while you're inside, I'll make sure you don't even have money for commissary. Gavin looked at Sarah. She was watching him with zero sympathy. Sarah, please, he begged. After everything we had? 7 years? 7 years of me supporting you, Sarah said. 7 years of me hiding who I was so you wouldn't feel small. And you repaid me by treating me like a servant. Sign the papers, Gavin. Gavin looked at the pen Arthur held out. His hand shook violently as he took it. He looked at the document, transfer of ownership. He signed. Good, Arthur said, snatching the paper back. Now, get out. Get out? Gavin blinked. But where do I go? I don't know, Arthur said, sitting back down and taking a sip of his scotch. I hear there's a motel on the outskirts of town. Very affordable. It's where Sarah stayed when you kicked her out. But I have no car, no money. Sarah stepped forward. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a single $20 bill. She tucked it into Gavin's tuxedo pocket. For the taxi, she said. Consider it alimony. Cole opened the door. The sounds of the party outside, the laughter, the music, the clinking glasses flooded in. Gavin walked out of the room, past the security guards, past the billionaires. He walked out of the hotel and onto the cold Chicago street. He reached into his pocket and touched the $20. It was all he had left in the world. He had won the divorce, but he had just lost his life. And yet, Arthur and Sarah weren't done. The dismantling of Gavin Reynolds was only in phase 1, because while he was now broke, he was still free, and Arthur Sterling believed that some debts couldn't be paid with money. The slide from the penthouse to the pavement is steep, but the landing is what breaks you. For 3 weeks, Gavin Reynolds lived in room 14 of the Blue Star Motel, a decaying establishment near the interstate where the neon sign buzzed incessantly through the night. The room smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. Sarah's $20 had bought him a taxi to the motel and a bottle of water. Since then, he had been surviving on pawned items, his watch, his cufflinks, even his phone. Gavin Reynolds, the man who once ordered $500 steaks without looking at the price, was now eating instant noodles made with lukewarm tap water. But the hunger in his stomach was nothing compared to the hunger for revenge rotting his soul. He refused to accept his reality. In his mind, this was a temporary glitch, a narrative arc. He was the hero in the second act, enduring the dark night of the soul before his triumphant return. He spent his days at the public library, the same library Sarah used to work at, using the free internet to search for jobs. It was humiliating. Every time he walked in, he expected the librarians to recognize him as the husband who had publicly shamed their colleague. They didn't, but the paranoia gnawed at him. He sent out resume after resume. Consultant, strategist, director. The responses were silence. Or worse, one afternoon, he managed to get a phone interview with a mid-sized logistics firm in Ohio. The interviewer, a man named Miller, sounded enthusiastic at first. Your resume is impressive, Mr. Reynolds. Vanguard's growth numbers were stellar. I built that company from the ground up, Gavin lied smoothly, sitting on the edge of his stained motel bed. I'm looking for a new challenge. Right, Miller said. Then the typing stopped. Wait, Reynolds. Gavin Reynolds? The one involved in the Sterling Mercer acquisition? I facilitated the sale. Yes, Gavin spun. I see. Miller's voice dropped 50 degrees. Mr. Reynolds, I'm going to be honest. We can't hire you. Why not? I'm overqualified. It's not your qualifications. It's your standing. There's a note in the industry database. A do not hire flag attached to your credit profile. It says, high risk, fraudulent practices. And frankly, word gets around. You cross the Sterlings. The Sterlings are vindictive liars, Gavin shouted into the receiver. Good luck, Mr. Reynolds, Miller said, and hung up. Gavin threw the cheap burner phone across the room. It cracked against the wall. He sat in the silence, his breathing jagged. They had blacklisted him. Arthur Sterling hadn't just taken his money. He had salted the earth so nothing could ever grow again. Fine, Gavin whispered, his eyes bloodshot. If I can't build, I'll burn. He remembered something. A loose end. Back when Vanguard was his, Gavin had cut corners. To save money on server security, he had hired a freelance hacker named Silas to set up a backdoor into the logistics network. It was illegal, a way to bypass customs checks digitally for certain high-paying, under-the-table clients. When Arthur took over, his forensic accountants had found the fraud, but they likely changed the passwords. However, Gavin knew Silas, and Silas knew the architecture of the system better than anyone. If Gavin could get into the system, he could crash the Nebula distribution grid right before their first massive launch under Sarah's leadership. He could cause millions in damages. Sterling Mercer stock would tank. Sarah would look incompetent. It wouldn't get him his money back, but it would destroy her. And right now, mutual destruction felt like a victory. He pawned his wedding ring, the last thing he had left to pay Silas. They met in a diner on the south side at 2 a.m. Silas was a jittery man in a gray hoodie, nursing a black coffee. "You look like hell, Reynolds," Silas sneered. "Cut the commentary," Gavin snapped. "Can you do it? Get into Vanguard's mainframe? It's tough. They upgraded the firewalls. But I left a kernel in the code, a ghost key. If I activate it, I can corrupt the shipping manifests. The trucks will go to the wrong cities. The inventory will vanish from the screens. Total chaos. Do it," Gavin hissed. "I want the launch tomorrow to be a disaster." "It'll cost you," Silas said. "More than a wedding ring. I'll pay you when the stock drops," Gavin promised desperately. "I'm shorting the stock. When it crashes, I'll make millions. Then I'll pay you double." It was a lie. Gavin had no money to short the stock. He just needed Silas to pull the trigger. Silas looked at him, studying his face. Then he shrugged. "All right, but I need physical proximity. I need to be within range of their local server farm to bridge the connection. You know where the warehouse is." "I know it," Gavin said. "I built it. Meet me there tonight at 3 a.m. We park around the back. I run the script. We watch the fireworks." Gavin felt a surge of adrenaline. He wasn't powerless anymore. He was the saboteur. He arrived at the massive Vanguard distribution center at 2:50 a.m. The building was a monolith of steel and concrete, lit by floodlights. Inside, the automated robots were preparing the Nebula shipment for the morning launch. It was an operation worth $50 million. Gavin waited in the shadows of the loading dock, shivering in his thin jacket. He saw a car pull up. Silas got out, carrying a laptop. "You ready?" Silas whispered. "Born ready," Gavin grinned, his teeth chattering. "Destroy it all." Silas opened the laptop. He typed a furious stream of code. The screen reflected in Gavin's eyes, green text scrolling like a waterfall. "Accessing main grid," Silas muttered. "Bypassing protocols. Okay, I'm in. One keystroke. Gavin, you sure you want to do this? This is a federal crime. Cyber terrorism, basically." "They took my life," Gavin spat. "Push the button." Silas hovered his finger over the enter key. He looked at Gavin one last time. "Push it!" Gavin screamed. Silas smiled. But it wasn't a nervous smile. It was a calm, professional smile. He closed the laptop. "What are you doing?" Gavin demanded. "Do it." "I don't think I will," Silas said. Suddenly, the floodlights in the parking lot snapped on, blindingly bright. Gavin threw his hands up to shield his eyes. "Gavin Reynolds," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "This is the Chicago Police Department. Drop to your knees." Gavin spun around. He was surrounded. 3 squad cars blocked the exit. Officers with drawn weapons were advancing. And standing behind the police line, safe and warm in a wool coat, stood Arthur Sterling. Next to him was Sarah. Gavin looked at Silas. "Sorry, Gav," Silas shrugged. "Mr. Sterling pays better, and he pays in advance." The silence of the industrial park was shattered, not by the click of a keyboard, but by the concussive thud-thud-thud of floodlights igniting one by one. Gavin Reynolds stood frozen on the loading dock, his hand halfway extended toward the laptop. The sudden illumination was blinding, turning the pitch-black night into a harsh, exposure-filled white. He shielded his eyes, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "What did you do?" Gavin screamed at Silas, his voice cracking with panic. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't run. He simply closed the laptop with a calm, deliberate snap, sliding it into his backpack. "I did my job, Gavin. I secured the network." Network secured. Suspects acquired. A mechanical voice boomed from a loudspeaker mounted on a tactical vehicle that had just screeched around the corner. Blue and red lights erupted from the darkness, bouncing off the steel walls of the Vanguard distribution center. 3 squad cars boxed them in against the loading bay doors. Officers in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn, their beams cutting through the mist. "Gavin Reynolds, put your hands in the air and drop to your knees. Now." Gavin's legs gave way, but not out of compliance, out of sheer terror. He collapsed onto the cold concrete, the grit biting into his palms. "It wasn't me. I was coerced. He's the hacker," he sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Silas. Silas stood calmly, placing his hands behind his head as if he were relaxing at a beach resort. An officer approached him, but instead of roughing him up, he nodded. "Clear," the officer said into his radio. "Asset is secure." Gavin blinked, the realization dripping into his brain like ice water. Asset. Silas wasn't being arrested. From behind the wall of police cruisers, a black SUV pulled up. The back door opened, and Arthur Sterling stepped out. He was dressed in a heavy wool coat, looking like a monolith of judgment. He walked over to the police line, and then he reached a hand back into the car to help someone else out. Sarah. She wore a trench coat belted at the waist and high leather boots. She walked past the police, past Silas, and stopped 5 feet from where Gavin knelt in the dirt. She looked down at him. There was no triumph in her eyes, no gloating smirk. There was only a profound, crushing disappointment. "You really did it," she said, her voice barely audible over the idling engines of the police cars. "I told my father you wouldn't. I told him, Gavin is greedy, but he's not a criminal. He won't try to hurt innocent workers just to spite me. I bet him $1 you would walk away." She reached into her pocket, pulled out a crisp dollar bill, and handed it to Arthur. "I lost," she whispered. "Sarah." Gavin scrambled forward on his knees, only to be yanked back by a police officer. "Sarah, listen to me. I was desperate. I'm sick. I need help, not prison. Please, tell them to stop. We're family." Arthur stepped forward, his shadow engulfing Gavin. "You ceased to be family the moment you treated my daughter as a line item to be liquidated. You aren't being arrested for a family dispute, Mr. Reynolds. You are being arrested for conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, attempted computer fraud, and breaking and entering. And given the scale of the Nebula contract you tried to sabotage, this is a federal offense. Cuff him," the sergeant ordered. As the cold steel ratcheted shut around his wrists, Gavin looked at Silas one last time. "Why?" Gavin rasped. Silas smirked, lighting a cigarette as the cops led Gavin away. "I told you, Reynolds. You play checkers. The Sterlings play 4D chess. They've been monitoring your dark web searches for weeks. We were just waiting for you to show up." The interrogation. The holding cell at the precinct was a sensory deprivation tank of misery. It smelled of stale urine and industrial bleach. Gavin sat on a metal bench bolted to the floor, shivering. His tuxedo, the symbol of his former glory, was now stained with grease and dirt, the collar torn from the arrest. He had been there for 6 hours. No lawyer had come. His phone call to Simon Blackwood had gone to a disconnected number. When the heavy steel door finally buzzed and swung open, Gavin shot up, expecting a public defender. It was Sarah again. She entered the small, windowless room and sat at the metal table. She placed a single manila folder in front of her. The guard remained outside, watching through the glass. "You can't be here," Gavin croaked. "It's against procedure." "I'm the victim," Sarah said calmly, "and the prosecution thought it might be therapeutic for both of us." Before you go away, Gavin sat slowly. Go away? Sarah? Come on. I'm a first-time offender. I'll get probation. Community service. Sarah opened the folder. Gavin, look at this. She slid a document across the table. It wasn't a legal brief. It was a bank transfer record from 7 years ago. What is this? That is the record of me paying off your student loans, she said. $38,000. I sold my grandmother's jewelry to do it. I told you I won a small lottery scratch-off because I didn't want to hurt your pride. She slid another paper. This is the down payment on the penthouse. You thought you saved enough from your bonuses. You didn't. I transferred 50 grand into your savings account, incrementally, over 2 years, disguised as interest adjustments. I did it so you would feel like the man of the house. Gavin stared at the papers, his mouth dry. Why are you showing me this? To show you that I never cared about the money, Sarah said, her voice trembling with a sudden, intense emotion. I had millions, Gavin. I could have bought Vanguard 10 times over, before we even got married. But I wanted us. I wanted to build something real. I made myself small so you could feel big. And how did you repay me? I loved you, Gavin stammered, falling back on his old charm, though it felt hollow now. No, Sarah cut him off sharply. You loved having a fan, and the moment you thought you were big enough, you discarded me like I was trash. You humiliated me in that restaurant. You laughed about it at your party. You tried to leave me with nothing. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. I didn't destroy you, Gavin. I just stopped propping you up. And look at how fast you fell. Please, Gavin whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just drop the charges. I'll go away. I'll move to Nebraska. I'll disappear. It's out of my hands, Sarah said, standing up and buttoning her coat. The FBI is involved now, but I did ask the district attorney for one favor. What? Gavin asked, a flicker of hope igniting. I asked them to make sure you go to a facility with a good library, she said, her voice dripping with tragic irony. You always said reading was for boring people. You're going to have a lot of time to catch up. She knocked on the glass. The guard opened the door. Sarah! Gavin screamed, lunging against the table, the chains rattling violently. Don't leave me here. I'm Gavin Reynolds. I'm somebody. She didn't look back. The door clanged shut, sealing him in silence. The verdict. The trial was swift. It wasn't the media circus Gavin had hallucinated about. There were no cameras, no admiring fans protesting his innocence. It was a dry, bureaucratic dissection of his failures. The evidence was overwhelming. The audio recordings of him bragging about fraud, the logs of him hiring Silas, the forensic accounting of his Cayman accounts. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Gavin stood up. He wanted to give a speech about ambition, about how the system was rigged, but when he opened his mouth, he saw Arthur Sterling sitting in the back row, arms crossed, watching him with the impassive stare of a man watching a bug hit a windshield. Gavin faltered, I just wanted to win. Mr. Reynolds, the judge said, peering over his glasses. Life is not a game to be won. It is a responsibility to be managed. You have failed in every regard. Sentence. 15 years in a federal correctional institution. 6 months later, the FCI Sandstone was a bleak, gray complex in the middle of nowhere. It was a place where time didn't pass. It eroded. Inmate 8,940 pushed the heavy canvas cart down the hallway of the laundry block. The air was thick with the smell of industrial detergent and damp cotton. Gavin's hands, once manicured and soft, were red and chapped. His back ached constantly. He wasn't the boss here. He wasn't even a consultant. He was the guy who folded underwear for murderers and thieves. He shuffled into the break room for his 15-minute lunch. He grabbed a plastic tray of lukewarm mash and sat in the corner, keeping his head down. Eye contact here was a currency he couldn't afford to spend. On the wall, a small, caged television buzzed with the afternoon news. Usually, the inmates watched sports or music videos, but today, the channel was stuck on a national business network. Turn that crap off, a large inmate with a neck tattoo grumbled. Wait, Gavin whispered, involuntarily. On the screen, a banner headline read, Sterling Mercer posts record profits. The camera cut to a live feed of a gala in Chicago, the same ballroom where Gavin's life had ended. But the atmosphere was different. It was warmer, less aggressive. At the podium stood Sarah. She looked breathtaking, not in a flashy, trophy wife way, but in a way that commanded absolute respect. She wore a tailored white suit that seemed to glow under the lights. We are redefining what success looks like, Sarah said, into the microphone, her voice confident and clear. Profit without purpose is just greed. Today, I am proud to announce that Vanguard is launching the Second Chance Initiative. We will be offering job training and employment to non-violent offenders who are looking to rebuild their lives after prison. The crowd erupted in applause. The camera panned to the side of the stage. Standing there was Arthur, looking proud. And next to Sarah was a man Gavin didn't recognize. He was tall, with kind eyes and a messy tie. He wasn't a shark. He was a high school principal, Sarah's new fiancé. He looked at her like she was the only person in the room. She looks happy, the inmate with the tattoo said, shoveling food into his mouth. That the broad, running the charity? Gavin stared at the screen. He saw the woman he had called dead weight, carrying the weight of an empire with grace. He saw the life he could have had if he hadn't been so obsessed with chasing something better. He realized then that he had never actually known his wife. He had only known the reflection of himself he projected onto her. And now that the mirror was broken, he was invisible. Yeah, Gavin said, his voice cracking. He looked down at his tray, unable to bear the brightness of her smile. She's the one running it. You know her? The inmate asked, squinting at Gavin. Gavin paused. He thought about the restaurant, the divorce papers, the betrayal. No, Gavin whispered, a single tear falling into his gray mash. I used to know a girl who looked like her, but she's gone. A buzzer sounded. Lunch was over. Gavin Reynolds stood up, scraped his tray into the garbage, and walked back toward the laundry room to wash the stains out of other people's clothes, while Sarah Sterling continued to wash the world clean of his mistakes. Gavin Reynolds believed that winning the divorce meant keeping the assets and discarding the person. He viewed life as a zero-sum game, where kindness was a weakness and leverage was the only currency. But he made the fatal error of confusing silence with submission. Sarah didn't fight him with shouting matches or public scenes. She fought him with the truth, patience, and the immense power of integrity. This story serves as a stark reminder. Never humiliate someone you think you've defeated. You never know who they truly are, or who is standing in the shadows ready to back them up. Real power isn't about how much you can take. It's about what you can build and who you become when everything is stripped away. If you were in Sarah's shoes, would you have offered the Second Chance program to someone like Gavin, or does he deserve to stay in the laundry room? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you believe in karma.